People who are listening should know that Mr. Matt Kelly has now put on his spectacles, which always indicates a moment of great gravity and importance.
I can't find my script, Matt. Did you send it to me? Huh? Oh, you've WhatsApped it, sorry. Hello, I'm Matt Kelly.
And I'm Matt D'Ancona.
And this is The Two Matts for the week ending Friday, the 28th of July. A podcast where pain is subjective.
Pain is subjective.
That will come to make sense.
It
Matt,
will.
What did we talk about in this episode?
We talked about the massive overreaction to the Uxbridge by-election and the way in which both main parties are retreating from
green commitments
they've made.
Yeah. And we also talked about the fantastic piece of television on Channel 4, Gregg Wallace and Michelle Roux Jr. in The British Meat Miracle.
Which is a mystery that will be unwrapped before your very ears.
Yes, it will.
Or eyes if you're watching on YouTube.
Absolutely fabulous and well worth
and fascinating.
Hanging on for the second half to hear about that. What should we call this week's episode?
Well, pain subjective is pretty good.
Pain subjective.
Should we do that?
Yeah, folks. To people who haven't heard listened or watched the Gregg Wallace bit of telly, that will be utterly meaningless, but it will make sense.
You'll
if
understand.
you persevere.
It's a good, come hither, isn't it?
It is.
So like so much that we do.
Done deal. This is The Two Matts, episode 6.
Pain subjective.
What are we going to talk about?
I think we should talk about Green Retreat. Because
yes.
I think the theme of the week has been, there's lots going on this week, but for me the theme of the week has been, it started with the by-election results and Uxbridge and Ruislip being, just held by the Tories. That then led to, it's all to do with ULEZ, the ultra-low emission zone, being extended by Sadiq Khan to that area, and there was no doubt it was a big issue in that by-election for very specific reasons, which then just kind of grew into, more predictably, sort of Rishi Sunak dialing down the Green, basically.
Yeah. It was a bit reminiscent of the Green crap kind of.
It was very. In fact,
back to David Cameron.
there's a good clip of him talking about not wanting to hassle people. I wonder if our wonderful producer
can the third Matt get that clip up?
Can play it for us.
Great.
So yes, we're going to make progress towards net zero, but we're going to do that in a proportionate and pragmatic way that doesn't unnecessarily give people more hassle and more cost in their life. That's what I'm not interested and prepared to do.
What a delivery, by the way. He's like the bloody Wheel of Fortune standing guy. It's like
he leans forward a lot, doesn't he?
But it's like it's so plastic.
And also, if you didn't know he was talking about the potential extinction of the human race and climate emergency that will devastate the planet and many species other than ourselves and cause suffering on a planetary scale that we haven't even begun to see, you would never guess that's what he's saying. He's as if this can be framed in terms of the amount of hassle it causes people. Probably it does cause people a bit of hassle, but then so do droughts and floods and heart diseases caused by overheating.
But I'm finding it really hard on a personal level to get beyond the obvious insincerity of it all.
Yes, I agree.
If only that bullshit was a little bit more convincing, if they put a bit more effort into trying to just at least appear a bit more sincere, I wouldn't be so riled by it. But it's the kind of arrogant, look, I really can't be arsed dealing with this, but I'm just going to bark into this camera and grin like a lunatic.
And say the same things 10 times.
Of course.
Yes.
And expect people to go, because no one's listening, because it's the delivery of it is so absolutely facile.
I'm sure that's true. People switching off. I can't see either side being particularly reassured by that. Certainly people who care about climate change, but by the way, is a lot bigger than some conservatives think, because there's two elements to it. The young, of course, are very heavily skewed to caring deeply about this, but there's also a very large number of conservatives who believe in action about climate and indeed about air pollution and other things because they are conservers, old-fashioned Tory voters, if you like. And polling-wise, there's no doubt that people are, they're chary about individual measures, because everyone is. If you say, do you like this tax rising, there's always going to be an opposition. But if you talk to them about the generality, overwhelmingly people have now moved to a position where they really care. And the thing that tends to push people over the hill is the idea that it's just not right to bequeath to the next generation, a fried planet.
And yet, okay, so here's the flip side of it, the evidential flip side.
Yeah.
Is that we do know in Boris Johnson's old seat, people did get very leery about the idea of 1 in 10 older, very polluting cars effectively being taken off the road because they've become unaffordable. And it did cost a by-election. So it is this weird paradox, isn't it, where we all look at the front pages of Roads on Fire and we think, bloody hell, I was there on holiday last year. And actually, my cousin's on holiday there now and not having a great time. And the planet's on fire, but I don't want to pay £12.50 to move my car.
Yes.
So there is something generic, macro and micro, that don't match.
And this is why the absence of leadership is the problem, which is that, of course, the measures necessary to do anything about this are going to be difficult, thorny, and in many cases flawed. I mean, the ULEZ is flawed because it doesn't address exactly what you mentioned, Matt, which is that, as Uxbridge shows, there's a very specific issue there, which is not great public transport. It's not that posh. Many parts of it are quite, people who are not, well off. And they of course, therefore, disproportionately have older cars, which makes them more liable to the ULEZ charge, and therefore it's regressive. Now, the way to deal with that is to say, message received, we need a better scrappage system, but not to retreat from the whole green agenda. And I think that, you expect, so Lord Frost, David Frost, very much a sort of right-wing Brexiteer, stormed in with, climate change is going to happen and we should take advantage of it, which is the most extraordinary thing.
Well, he was basically saying, well, climate change might not be such a bad thing if
exactly.
We live in a cold, wet country. If a bit more sunshine,
it benefits
happy
us, happy days, which is so ignorant. I mean, we've just had the Met Office this week saying that 2022 was the highest temperatures in history in the UK, and we tipped over 40 degrees, which is unheard of, and so the direction of travel is very clear.
Well, what they said was that by the end of the century, that's going to feel like a cold summer.
Exactly,
and that's what my younger kids are going to see. They'll see that as old citizens. That's what they'll be living in. So it's very clear.
It's true that ULEZ it's not actually anything to do with climate change. It's to do with air pollution. But hang on, I mean, the figures are about rising respiratory diseases.
Well, this is the point, Matt.
Asthma.
But this is where I can't... I mean, maybe I'm missing it, but if I am, then there's something wrong, because I'm a Londoner.
Yeah.
And I've been living within the ULEZ, the inner ULEZ cordon for some time, and appreciate that nitrogen dioxide levels are dropping substantially. But for me, as somebody thinking about how would I frame this as a journalist, if I was trying to make the case for this on the front page of a tabloid newspaper like the Daily Mirror, I'd have a sea of people who died from asthma in London last year. And by the way, there is a bloody sea of them. I think there's like 4,000 people.
It's plenty. I mean,
and the UK has the worst respiratory conditions of any nation in Western Europe, right? And London is the worst of the worst. I think there was a report like 24 of the worst 30 constituencies are in that outer London ring for asthma conditions. So that's what you've got to try and personalise it and say,
this affects your kids, this affects you.
These 20 people in your borough died last year because of this thing, which is entirely preventable. But we are breathing this shit that's coming out of these old cars. Sorry, folks, but you're going to have to move on.
But we live in an era, unfortunately, where that narrative, which it seems to me is a very plausible one and a persuasive one, is just not what politicians are doing. That populism doesn't like that kind of, it's going to cost you, but we can work it out.
Well, yeah, but isn't it the case that the populists actually are very good at saying, why should Mary Bloggs?
No, that's what I mean. It's like
they're good, but it's the other side.
Yes,
that it seems again like the bloody Remain campaign, waffling on about generalities.
Well,
instead of getting right down into the weeds
into
and
the
saying
human dimension,
these are the people, and it's you and your
and
friends.
A narrative that speaks to
That
people's
makes
hearts
sense.
as well as their heads, which brings us to Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
So I have some sympathy, a lot of sympathy for the argument that Starmer's people make, which is, look, we just need to get the Tories out, right, whatever it takes. However, there have to be some limits to that, and I think the New European has argued very well that there has to be a different line on Brexit than making Brexit work, which is feeble.
Yeah.
But I was seriously dismayed by Starmer's response to Uxbridge, which was, he goes straight to the National Policy Forum in Nottingham, I think, and says, we should really think about where we were on ULEZ because of course Sadiq Khan, Labour Mayor and so on, we can't be having a policy that's on every single Conservative leaflet. Now, let's just take that thought for a minute. Yeah. All your policies are going to be on Conservative leaflets if you have any by the time we go to a general election. That cannot be the criterion for whether or not Labour supports ULEZ or, for that matter, radical action on climate change. We've already had the row back from the 28 billion investment a year. It's now going to be during the next parliament, not immediately. And just a line that struck me in a Sunday Times piece, which was one of Starmer's people saying to the Sunday Times that the green policies were, quotes, dead weights.
Yeah.
And that is green, like Cameron's green crap, David Cameron's green crap. So I understand that Starmer's nervous about Ed Miliband's more visionary approach to climate. I would rather he went with the Miliband, but there's a difference between saying, right, let's hold our horses a little bit for electoral reasons.
He seems too conservative to
but
me.
just,
he needs to
he's now talking about it's very hard to see what's left in terms of greenery about this Labour Party. And that is a disastrous position because he has to do more than just be a beater of the Conservatives. He has to be someone who's going to have a governing vision. And he talks about missions all the time, right? Well, if ever there's a mission that needs to be grasped, and as you said, given a sort of narrative that speaks to voters' hearts, which is if you vote Labour, we will make this a cleaner, less carbon emitting country post haste, because we know that's what you care about. And not being afraid of saying that, because of course Rishi Sunak and Lord Frost and Suella Braverman and Grant Shapps talking about Labour being the political wing of Just Stop Oil. And it was a wonderful letter by John Gummer, who used to be the Environment Secretary, this week, just saying, grow up. You can't talk like that about an issue of this gravity.
And also, I heard Alistair Campbell, your co-editor at large of the New European,
the editor at large, I think we call
the editor at large, and also he's got a small podcast which I've got hopes for. I think it's going to do quite well.
I think it might do quite well. Fingers crossed.
It's not bad.
Big shout out to Alistair and Rory.
He was saying they loved it. They loved it when the Tories were talking about their policies.
Of course.
They lived for that. It's called setting the agenda.
Earned advertising.
Absolutely. They wanted to be able to be pushed into the debate so they could have the debate.
Of course.
Now, at the moment, what you've got is banal sound bites from a banal prime minister and a leader of the opposition who seems quite comfortable just sitting in the slipstream of that and doesn't want to break out of it for fear of scaring horses.
You have to. And I remember Blair, in his memoirs, talks about how it's fine to be cautious, but there is a point where you have to get going.
Yeah,
and that's long past here.
Surely Starmer, the one I know they've thrown Corbynism out of the window completely.
But
I think there was a baby that got thrown out as well, which was what Corbyn was able to do, obviously, because the policies, as far as I'm concerned, were not electoral winners, but the passion was, and the vision,
exactly right.
And the way he spoke of a promise of a better world. So my view is he was never going to get us to a better world. But the way he went about it was very effective.
The need for a new social contract.
Yes,
and
exactly
also,
that.
as we've said before, the need for the 21st century to start.
Exactly.
Because that's the Labour task, which is to say, okay, right, we've had this sort of terrible period in which terrible damage has been done to not just the British economy, but also the British sense of self-esteem and relevance to the world and social solidarity. These things have been seriously vandalised. Our job is to not just bring Britain back to a position of self-respect, but also really tackling the problems of today.
Yeah.
And he's not doing that. And the one sort of thing that makes me think he could still stumble is that all campaigning history shows that the problem with being a blank check is that your enemies get to define you.
Yeah.
So if he goes into the election being defined by what he isn't, that enables the Tories to say anything. And they will say he's going to tax you to the skies. They'll say it's going to be Labour's tax bombshell number 2. They just want to smuggle in socialism under greenery. They love Just Stop Oil. Just name it. That we could make up the slogans ourselves. And that's a very dangerous position for the opposition to be in.
And I'm afraid that as much as, we cried out for a period of political stability, listening to Sunak and Starmer, it does remind you what's good about personality politics. It's like a conversation or a debate between a smarmy estate agent and a clever conveyancing lawyer. It's just it's generic
totally
nonsense.
I know that after the sort of theatrical grotesqueries of Boris Johnson, there was a point where people were saying, you know what, we want a bit of boring.
Yeah.
I don't think people ever want a bit of boring.
No.
Even Trump, for all his horrific qualities, which scarcely need to be mentioned, one of the reasons he won was because he is compelling and interesting.
But why is it always the bad guys who are so bloody charismatic?
Well, it isn't always, actually. I mean, Obama, you can argue that his presidency was disappointing.
No, you're absolutely right.
Ditto Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
The difference between the two Clintons is chalk and cheese, because Hillary Clinton is a classic example, I think, of the kind of politician we're talking about. She thinks that if you throw data visualizations into the Midwest, you sort of drop them from a plane, people will go, oh, well, I like this. I'm going to vote Democrat. Whereas Bill Clinton was a kind of, he was a charisma machine in 92. And again, he ran into trouble and all sorts of difficulties. But one must never forget that he started the wave that Schroeder and Blair surfed. He was supernaturally good in that election.
And you've got to say, I know he's like the ultimate divisive figure, and for many reasons, rightly so, but Blair had it in spades. But Blair was probably the last real, genuine, charismatic leader
Blair,
this
94
country's
to
had.
97, was a force of nature. And, they are around. I think...
who do you think of the current crop has got it?
I think Wes Streeting has got it. Yes, I do. I think he and Peter Kyle, who, are basically the equivalent of Brown and Blair, have it in them to be an absolutely incredible double act.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, the person that immediately came to mind was the person we interviewed for last week's podcast, Caroline Lucas, who's sadly leaving the parliamentary scene at any rate. I think she is a genuinely inspiring figure.
Yeah, it's just such a shame that the Labour Party, for instance, couldn't accommodate somebody like that, because she could do a lot of effective stuff within one of the two parties that are only ever going to wield any influence in this country.
I'm absolutely a fan of having people around senior politicians who are, nerdish and brilliant and fantastic at detail and granular detail. But I'm not a believer in technocracy. The way back for the left of centre, for want of a better word, is not to just produce reams of data saying Brexit hasn't worked, though it hasn't, but to speak to the heart and to find ways of, honestly rather than dishonestly, because that's got to be the crucial difference, is that one of the terrible legacies of this era of Tory populism has been that no one trusts anything.
That's right.
So it has to, what Labour says and the Lib Dems say has to be, they have to be able to bank that check.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to come back to it again, but because I do, I realise that I'm probably looking at this in quite a shallow way, but please, just some charisma and energy and inspiration in politics. I remember speaking to somebody about Google when I was a technology correspondent, and I said, but what they're doing, it doesn't seem to make any sense, blah, blah, blah. And he said, listen, don't make the mistake of thinking that they're clever people. They're not. There's a few of them that are very clever, but there's a lot of people in Google who are very, very mediocre people, and they're just a big corporation like anybody else, and the same politics goes on in that office as any other office. And the more you look at politics right now, the more mediocre and tired it seems, and some of them you wouldn't send out for a bag of chips, never mind to rewrite a climate manifesto. You know, it's got, where is the spark?
It's very interesting. You talked about corporations, because two things, totally different poles of. I totally agree with you. I don't think it's a shallow point. I think it's the point. So I watched an episode of the original Office the other day, because it's just sort of so good. But what I did think was, my God, David Brent, Ricky Gervais's David Brent is now quite like a party political leader. That's how, the kind of slightly dishonest, very dishonest kind of self-presentation and toe-curling awfulness. I mean, that's kind of what politics has become. The other thing, which is at the other extreme, was just because I'm interested in it and actually planning next week's column, I listened to JFK's speech in Rice University in Texas in I think 1962, about the space race. Yeah. We don't go to the moon because it's easy, we go there because it's hard.
That's right.
Can you imagine any politician, let alone politician in this country, saying that now?
Well, isn't it? It's the polar opposite of what they are saying right now.
Yes.
Both in style, because that was a great piece of oratory, and these people wouldn't know oratory if they smacked them in the face.
Also,
but in substance as well.
And also, they, instead of giving vision and hope and inspiration, they pre-blame failure on the weakest and the most vulnerable.
Rishi Sunak would have said, we'd like to go to the moon, but we're not going to right now because it's a bit inconvenient.
And also because of all these small boats. I'd love to go to the moon.
Yeah, I want to sink some dinghies first.
He did a Twitter thread this week about small boats and activist lawyers, as he put it, which was essentially a plug for the Daily Mail.
It really was.
And the words "new low" do spring to mind, don't they?
I mean, you had to that first tweet where you had to divine the commas in it. So is he really saying the Labour Party are aligned with criminal gangs?
Apparently,
it really is what he was saying.
He was what he was saying, and it's certainly what he intended to be taken away.
Appalling.
But when you move to shamelessness is a very liberating thing.
Yes.
Because it doesn't get you anywhere, but when you get to where he is, and I do believe he's shameless. I don't buy this idea that he's Mr. Nice Guy just because he smiles a lot and goes to the movies with his kids to watch Barbie. I don't. To be honest, I don't care. Right?
Yeah.
Look. Show not tell. What's he actually doing? What he's doing is he's victimizing the weakest people on earth, the most vulnerable, needy people on earth, in order to give his party a hope at least of perhaps minimising the scale of Labour's victory.
That's right.
I mean, how many kinds of deplorable is that?
How do you sleep at night?
How do you sleep at night,
Mr. Sunak?
How
do you sleep at night?
How do you sleep at night? Because if he is indeed Mr. Reasonable and Mr. Stanford Business School, Mr. Hedge Funder, Mr. Smiley, it's all the worse.
Yeah.
No, you can't even blame it on psychosis.
Right. At least, you could say to Boris Johnson, well, he's genetically like that.
He can't help
himself.
He can't help himself.
He's
Sunak. It's a decision.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen. That's. I think we've brought that to as far as we can go at the moment, but I have no doubt we'll return to it.
Absolutely.
But let's take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about Gregg Wallace. So, Matt, best bit of TV I've seen in a long time. I can't even remember what it's called now. The British Meat Miracle?
Yeah.
Something like that? Well, Channel 4?
You sent me a link on WhatsApp. And I thought,
had you not seen it till I
hadn't seen it. So I thought, this looks interesting. And I watched it, and I suspect, like you, I was very grateful. I was very grateful for the tip, but I watched it with a growing horror. Then I realised that it was a hoax. But even when I realised it was a hoax, I admired it even more.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, perhaps... Can you bring us up to speed on what it is?
So, yes, I mean, if there's
Gregg Wallace, MasterChef
So Gregg
star.
Wallace, the MasterChef star, who gets on my nerves in MasterChef because he's so bloody... I hate enthusiastic people. And
he's so enthusiastic, isn't he?
That's really unfair. I'm sure he's a lovely guy.
Slappably enthusiastic.
He's a lovely guy, I'm sure. But I've got to say, he plays an absolute blinder in this. And it's... The context of it is... And I'm pretending to be... very, very well read now. I didn't know that Jonathan Swift, Dean Swift, the great Irish satirist, Anglo-Irish satirist, had in 1729, I think, written an essay called A Modest Proposal, which was and I think the full title of it is something like, it's a modest proposal for to prevent poor children becoming a burden to their parents and the state, or something like this. And basically the proposal is that...
Do you want a quote from it? Because I've got some of it.
Have you? Yeah, go for it. Go on.
I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young, healthy child, well nursed is really horrible, isn't it? Is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled. And I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fricassee or a ragout.
It was the fricassee which got me. Yeah.
Oh, terrifying!
So
brilliantly written.
But the point about it was that when he wrote it in the 18th century, it was kind of, he was addressing a real stark situation.
Yes,
people in desperate poverty, didn't know how to feed themselves.
Starvation.
There was a famine going on. It's like, how do we get ourselves out of this? And, let's eat the children of the poor.
It's the obvious solution.
Flash forward 300 years. That's right, isn't it? 300 years.
And 6 shy.
And some genius in Channel 4 decides to do an updated version of this essay, A Modest Proposal. And Gregg Wallace, it's a bit more like one of his... I'll confess to being addicted to these, the Inside the Factory shows, where where you're making like Walker's crisps.
So here I am in the factory.
How do you make baked beans? How many? 2 billion baked beans an hour. It's amazing.
2 billion baked beans an
hour.
So
it's very much in that vein.
Yes.
But what it is, it's in a mocked up factory called Harvest, and it's human.
Good Harvest.
Human meat for humans from humans.
But they get it's incremental, like all great dramas. It's incremental. So he starts off with, they've taken human cells and they're cultivating them into what are effectively doner kebabs.
We call it meat cake.
He calls them doner doners. Meat cake, exactly. Yeah. And so the first slightly stomach churning thing is these kind of cultivated things, which are made from human cells originally, but not actual human flesh. So first of all, you're thinking, okay,
and then fast forward
to
where people are being paid, because this is the other side of the business model.
Yes,
which again is so plausible. You're poor; these people can't pay their energy bills, but what we can do is give them 400 quid for a bit of their buttocks, right? And then you've got these people in pre-op interviews where Gregg Wallace
really
is so
chillingly done,
and it was the point was that it was just so believable.
It was.
Where you got all these people saying, "Well, I can't pay my bills, I can't put any food on the table, but and I'm told it won't hurt." And then there's this venture capitalist, entrepreneur, chief executive saying, "No, it doesn't really. It's pain subjective."
Pain subjective. I thought.
What does that mean?
One for the ages, that wasn't
it? And these people are wheeled off into operating theatres and sliced up a bit, and not enough, obviously, to do any permanent damage. But then the meat is then put into this nutrition bath and balloons into these meat cakes, which are then sold as very cheap steaks. And then not only Gregg Wallace, but then you've got the great Michel Roux Jr. at is it Le Gavroche?
Yeah,
his double Michelin starred restaurant.
Again,
cooking up was total straight
face.
Cooking up these human steaks and then saying, "Do you think, Greg, that you could tell the difference between the taste of someone born in the northeast?
That's right. The Geordie
because
steak.
It's what we call in France the terroir."
It's really
it's brilliantly done. And the last kind of element to it is
the horror punch.
Is where they say there's a mystery piece of meat in the premium line.
Yes,
and It's served up, and the two of them go into raptures about
wonderful.
how
It's so
tasty this
delicious.
is. And then it is revealed at the boardroom meeting where Gregg Wallace is invited. And I apologise, we are giving the whole bloody thing away here, but I promise you, it won't affect how much fun this thing is to watch. It is revealed that this is the flesh of children.
Toddler tatar.
Toddler tatar. So, and at this point, Gregg Wallace pales a little bit.
Yes.
He's acting superbly.
Really
throughout.
superbly.
And the whole thing is maxed out to amplify the satire of it, but you're still left with this impression that you've watched a fantastic piece of television, but the reason it's so fantastic is it's literally so close to the bone.
It is really close to the bone. I mean, it made me think a lot, and kind of and look into a little bit, what are people doing out of desperation because of cost of living crisis? And it's everything but. There's, shoplifting is massively up.
Yeah.
Baby banks have had to open because people can't afford basics for their newborns. I mean, let's absorb that one
Horrific,
for a minute. There's organ trafficking. There was a trial in, I think, March, which didn't involve Brits, but it was the first time that organ trafficking using the Modern Slavery Act had been the subject of a trial, and it led to a lot of people in the charity sector saying there are obviously serious safeguarding issues here. We need to be very, very vigilant that people aren't basically selling their kidneys.
Although not quite as bad as Petronella Wyatt recently tweeted saying she knew personally of two people who'd come back off holiday with no kidneys.
Yes, I think we need a renal specialist to explain.
Yeah.
Quite
But
how
don't want to make
works.
light about people trading their kidneys for cash.
And more than 1 in 4 of all children in the UK now living in poverty.
Yeah.
So suddenly you realise, well, we live in a world of AI and incredible oncology and amazing technology and so on. But we also live in a world where there are people starving to death in the UK.
In the UK.
So Swift's inspiration to this programme, it's not just a bit of fun. It is very beautiful. It's purest satire because the reason it's funny is because it's close to the truth.
It's very adjacent to truth.
It's very, very troubling. I mean, you watch it and I love hoax programs. I mean, there's one that came out back in the 70s called Alternative 3. I don't know if you've seen it.
No, I haven't.
It's on YouTube and it's really good. It's a pretend episode of Science Report, and they do it. And the idea is that they've found evidence via investigation into the brain drain from Britain to the US of experts that actually people are being shuttled off the Earth to set up stations on the moon to go to Mars, which has already been landed on.
Yeah.
Preposterous, but it's beautifully done because it's done in the idiom, just as this one is done beautifully in the idiom of a Channel 5 program or something like that.
Yeah.
But because it's done in the very high, serious late 70s, science program thing, and it's people still watch it, and there are screenings.
And of course, you had the Chris Morris classic Nonsense.
That's right.
Where you had the procession of, I think Gary Lineker and Phil Collins and all of these people all saying this is nonsense.
Nonsense,
about how paedophiles were, whatever it was. You'll find it on YouTube. But fantastically well done. But again, because it's kind of plausible.
Yeah. And this one, I really, I think, massive props to all the people involved, because there were 400 complaints.
Well, so my first encounter with it was the outrage on Twitter with people saying, "Bloody hell! Have you seen this now? Channel 4 promoting this wacko company, where they're proposing to basically turn us all into bloody cannibals." And this went on for hours on Twitter, and then until people started saying,
until the Twitter hive mind finally woke up to the satire.
Then they Googled what satire was, and then they went
irony
back and said,
does not prosper on Twitter. I think it's fair to say, and especially now that the bird has been replaced by an X, which I think is sort of just horribly awful in every conceivable sad way,
turning into a Marvel comic.
But I think that was. I mean, it speaks to what you were talking about in the first half hour, which is the emotional impact of that documentary was immense.
Honestly, I'll give myself away. There was a bit where I was crying in it. Because,
no, it's horrible.
because there's a bit at the end where this poor little kid
Yes.
is saying clearly doesn't want to go, and this entrepreneur who is so well drawn,
Brilliantly drawn,
says, you know, do you want to be a hero? And the little kid nods, and she hands him like a cuddly toy or something, and sort of gestures, off you go into surgery then. And the kid turns and goes, and it was chokingly well done. You know,
it's a brilliant piece of television, and it shows why satire, when it's done as brilliantly as that, is as powerful as it can.
And it, you know, so much credit to everybody involved in that, because one misstep at any point would have absolutely punctured the
one
balloon.
Fleabag style look at the camera,
anything like
it
that
would have been a disaster.
But it was it trod the line perfectly,
and he maintained his noisy,
yeah,
aggravating persona throughout.
You know,
I am on the factory floor.
Gregg Wallace in A Warner has turned himself, I think, from one of Britain's most irritating TV personalities into an absolute bloody legend.
No, I mean, I it took a lot of guts to do that,
Yeah.
because it could have gone horribly wrong, and you know there has been some kickback, but I think the overall impression has been massively to the good.
I think, listen, if you haven't seen it, folks,
Watch it.
go and watch it and tell a friend to watch it, because I think not only is it great TV, but I honestly think it touches on so many real important issues, because if it wasn't that close to the bone, it wouldn't make you feel
it's actually
like
a bucket
it does.
of ice cold water.
It really
on
is.
the face, and you're thinking,
Yeah.
how have we got to the point where this is even slightly plausible?
Yeah.
In 2023,
Yeah.
it's awful but brilliant.
Well done,
watch
well
it.
done, Channel 4. Well done, Gregg Wallace.
Props to all of them.
This must be a relatively new process.
Well, it is. I mean, under EU law, we couldn't possibly operate machines like this due to legislation. But thankfully, now we're out. We can harvest people, and we can pay them for their flesh.
So what haven't we've waffled on
So much.
magically about Gregg Wallace for so long? There's stuff that's fallen through the cracks.
Well, let's bow our heads briefly in honour of Sinead O'Connor. That was a real blow, wasn't it?
It's one of those deaths where it wasn't a surprise, but it was a shock.
Shock, exactly. And all the obvious points. You know, Nothing Compares to You, one of the great videos of all time. And I was reading in one of the obits that John Maybury, who directed that video, did lots of filming around Paris for a sort of traditional 90s video. And then he decided, I'm just going to do this one shot with her. And kind of video history and pop history was made,
Yeah.
you know, and she cried. She says in her memoirs it's because she was thinking of her mother who was killed in a car accident.
But who was very abusive
but
to
who
her.
was also...
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
look, she led a very troubled and rackety life, and her relationship with the religion. You know, she was an ordained minister in a breakaway Catholic church. And
weirdly, she was the most notoriety she ever got wasn't here. It was in the States, where she appeared on Saturday Night Live and ripped up a photograph of John Paul II.
But helping to launch the
10 years later,
the
whole child
scandal.
abuse thing broke, and she was on the money.
Well
you know,
ahead. I mean, I think the kind of, you know, the epitaph is that actually she was what she always said she wanted to be. She was a protest singer.
That's right.
You know, and she made amazing pop. There's that duet with another lost last December, Terry Hall.
Yeah.
All Kinds of Everything from I think the late 90s, and beautiful rendition. And she did duets with Shane McGowan. But you know, she explored all kinds of genres, reggae and soul and jazz. But she didn't want to be a Celine Dion. She wanted to be Bob Dylan.
I think, she's clearly lived, you know, an awfully troubled life.
Very troubled.
I do think her legacy will be quite significant.
Oh yeah,
and her figure and personality and her character will live on a lot longer than many others.
That's the case. It's interesting, isn't it, when you know a cultural figure dies and you feel the breath go out of you,
and you sort of go, oh God,
yeah.
You know, that's a bit of me. It's a bit of us all, isn't it?
Part of our biography. It's a part of the
really
soundtrack
is.
of our lives.
It really was.
She's
really
only 56. Nothing. You know.
Nothing. 2 years older than my good self.
And lots else going on. I mean, it would be rude not to mention Mr. Dan, wouldn't
What's
it?
going on? We probably can't say for fear of Well, I don't know. Maybe we can. Dan Wootton, the GB News presenter, the Mail Online columnist, has been accused...
Well, not at the moment.
Yes. So well, let's assume he's been suspended, although Mail Online won't say anything about it. But what seems to be a terrific investigation by our fellow independent news media type, Byline Times,
Byline Times, sorry,
Byline Times, who've
done very well.
Who've been investigating him for 3 years in what's now known as a catfishing scam, or whatever you want to call it, where you're pretending to be somebody to get...
Someone called using the pseudonym Martin Branning.
Which is this portmanteau of two EastEnder characters, I think.
Apparently trying and using it to allegedly procure sexual images and footage of
colleagues.
Of colleagues, so very strange.
It's really, really bizarre story. So that's all there for people to look at if you want to, folks. But the thing that I find unbelievable is that the weight of this evidence, and he's now doing this crowdfunder to, let me sue. I think he's employed Mishcon de Reya, one of the biggest, most aggressive law firms in the world, to defend his reputation, send out threatening letters to publishers saying, pouring doubt on the story and stuff like this. How you can sit through pontificating about Philip Schofield, as he did ad nauseum, and then find yourself in exactly the same position, but pretend that the rules don't apply to you. Not only don't the rules apply, it's because of the rules that you're being attacked.
Not for the first time, we noticed that it's on the right that you get the worst snowflakes.
That's right.
Him saying that dark forces are at work.
Nefarious.
They're not, or rather not.
No, it's journalists that are at work.
It's called journalists, and he's Victoria Newton said, editor of the Sun said there's an investigation going on to what happened there. Yeah. As you said, the Mail Online is, shall we say, not using him at the moment. Yeah. He's obviously intending to use his GB News platform to continue this sort of phony crusade. Yeah. But there is a huge hypocrisy at minimum.
So anyway, folks, that's enough about Dan Wootton for the moment. Remember, please, the latest edition of The New European is on newsstands right now, as well as on our website. That's at theneweuropean.co.uk. And podcast listeners can get a great deal on a subscription. Just head to theneweuropean.co.uk/2Matts. That's the number 2, MATTS. And I will give you personally, out of my own pocket, 25 quid's worth of bollocks to Brexit passport cover to stick on your blue passport next time it comes through the post. And you'll get that free with a subscription to The New European. Thanks as ever to the third Matt. That's Matt Hill, our producer, Rethink Audio. And until next week...
It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.